we probably have had our level of uncertainty sort of recalibrated in that in the pre-internet age, we're used to sending a letter to a company and waiting 3-4 days for a response. And we were just happy spending 4 minutes not knowing. 4 days. Sorry. We're happy spending 4 days not knowing. Now we're not really that comfortable when we email a company with a customer complaint. Okay. Yeah. And we don't get a reply, because we go, oh God, they're going to reply in the next working day. That's Monday. It's now Sunday. I can't cope with this level of kind of being on tenterhooks for 24 hours.
What does back to sort of
so you're undoubtedly right that a Londoner in Cornwall is a fucking nightmare. In the same way that when you go to the Caribbean and you order a drink, you've just got to recalibrate yourself to Bajan time or Caribbean time. Because
it takes 3 days to customize, doesn't it?
And you eventually just compensate. You would just order every drink an hour before you actually want it, and everything works really, really well. Okay. But I quite like that in a way. I mean, in a way, we've lost something as well as gaining something. I mean, one of the problems undoubtedly that the NHS faces is that people have waiting times now calibrated by pizza delivery.
Yeah.
My father explained this to me, partly because it was wartime. He grew up in World War II.
Whereabouts?
He said, so he was at school in Cheltenham, and he said that if you wanted a nice new fountain pen, you went into probably Cavendish House, which is the Cheltenham department store, and you saw a pen that you liked. I'm not making this up, okay? Yeah. And they would say, right, we don't have that in stock. This is a display model. However, we will order a pen for you. And 4 days later, or maybe a week later at school, sometimes 3 weeks later, a postcard would arrive at school saying the pen you have ordered is now in stock.
Wow.
Okay? I mean, a whole load of things totally weird that my father told me, which is he bought a vacuum cleaner in Abergavenny and drove it home to Recall. I promise I'm not making this up, okay? Hoover-at-home. Now, bear in mind, in 1950, whatever it was, 55.
How old have you been at this point?
He was then 25. He was actually quite rich in his 20s because his father had died and he'd inherited a load of property from my father. My grandfather was a GP who'd bought a load of houses. So he was driving around in my grandfather's Humber Super Snipe. And he buys this vacuum cleaner in Abergavenny, drives it back, he potters around in Abergavenny for a bit, drives it back to Recall, okay? And when he gets back to Recall, I'm not making this up. There's a local. Recall is sort of five or 6 miles from Aber.
Yeah.
Okay. Abergavenny, of course, now is a food mecca, absolute culinary mecca. The Angel Hotel, there's the Walnut Tree at Llandewey Sgurried, there's the Abergavenny Food Festival. Yeah. Recall also is. I mean, both of those places, if you lived in Monmouth when I was a kid, were seen as a bit of a dump. But they're now actually in danger of outshining Monmouth as a place to go. They've had a kind of complete kind of deification, deservedly so, and all credit to them. A few really major entrepreneurs have done that. A food scene in a town that size can be changed by 5 or 6 people.
Yeah,
totally.
Yeah,
the actual size of the ecosystem you need to actually make something a foodie. It's the same things happened actually in Oxted. Not far from me, across the border in Surrey, but when he got home to Recall, there was a representative from Hoover, the vacuum cleaner company, asking him if he needed any help, sort of setting up the machine or learning how to use it. So labour was so comparatively cheap, and mass-manufactured goods were so comparatively expensive. Bear in mind, in modern money, the vacuum cleaner had probably cost him, 500 quid. Or something. Mm-hmm. It would have been several weeks' work, certainly for a working man. Okay? And you could then provide levels of service which were totally insane. I mean, imagine even if you buy a Dyson, right? You don't expect to get home and find a Dyson consultant coming around and pointing out the different settings for the brush. But admittedly, even in 1955, my father thought that was a bit weird and probably going a bit too far in terms of providing service. But you had a completely different ratio of how expensive goods were versus how expensive service or indeed servants were. Mm-hmm. Okay, so you could employ people for relatively little, but manufactured goods were insanely expensive. That's something that when we look at Gen Z and we think, God, they're really weird in their behaviour, a lot of it is that in my parents' generation, housing was comparatively cheap and trips to Australia were insanely unaffordable. And now you get 20. How many of you have been to Australia, just out of interest? How many of you have flown long haul? You haven't flown long haul? No. Actually, that's quite good because you've got something to look forward to. Because actually, I didn't fly long haul until I was 29. My grandfather, who's quite a rich doctor, okay, never flew long haul in his life, neither did my grandmother, okay? Yeah. My parents did it once, okay? Now, my kids don't know how often they've been on a long haul flight. And there's a bit of me which goes, actually, because I first did it when I was 29, flew into the United States in I would have been 27. Actually, was I? 93. Would have been 27, okay? First flew long haul when I was 27, and it was really effing exciting. You flew into Minneapolis Airport, and you looked down and you saw America, and you thought, shit, this is fucking amazing, right? Now, my parents-in-law, I did have to kind of slightly berate them because someone they knew got married, and they said, we don't understand it. They said, they've actually been on honeymoon to Australia, but they're planning to rent a house. And I had to explain to them that when they were 27 or whatever it was, you could buy a house for bugger all, particularly out of London, okay? But going to Australia was absolutely impossible. I mean, for a lot of people, even short-haul air travel was pretty damn exotic in my childhood, okay? And long-haul travel it certainly wasn't something you treated as routine. Whereas, by contrast, buying houses is totally unaffordable. Yeah. So an awful lot of Gen Z behaviour is just driven by finding themselves in completely different economic conditions. My father always had a theory, which I think is interesting, that property was underpriced for a long time in the 50s, 60s and 70s, partly because things that really mattered to you in terms of consumer goods, which would include buying a car, buying a washing machine, buying a television, those things were really, really expensive. So by the time you'd actually bought those things, you didn't have that much money to spend on a house.
Like an inversion. Yeah, okay.
And the thing that worries me about the economy as a Georgist is that every gain we have in buying, in manufacturing, for example, enormous flat screen TVs that cost almost nothing, almost every gain we brought to consumers in the shape of EasyJet or Ryanair, every gain we brought to consumers in the fact that actually if you buy a second-hand car, don't buy a second-hand car for £300 or £400. You'll get a piece of shit, right? Okay. Mm-hmm. But if you can cobble together 1,500, actually it's gone up a bit recently, but if you can cobble together just a few thousand, okay, you can now get a pretty good car. If you bought a car of equivalent cheapness in my childhood, it was a piece of shit. Yeah. Right? It was awful. It wouldn't start on a cold day, got every goddamn problem. And it was just an awful car.
Yeah, that's mad.
So my worry is that all we've done in consumer capitalism to give people more and more disposable income has not manifested itself in a better quality of life. It simply manifested itself in higher property prices, either higher rents or higher mortgages, okay, which simply means that the young are now working basically to pay for the retirements of the old.
Espressos is sponsored by supply chain software gurus Unleashed. It talks to your e-com and accounting software. It's helped islands cut admin time in half, get granular clarity on your margins, know where your stock is, don't miss availability. Brands like Candy Kittens, Tiny Rebel and Trip all use Unleashed, and so should you.